Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm Caroline, and I'm delighted to be presenting our next speaker, Julie Batilana. I had the honor of meeting Julie in one of our meetups and was absolutely astonished by her. Her sister Emily was diagnosed with PURA a few years ago, and in this talk, she will discuss how her experience growing up with her remarkably inspiring sister set her on a journey to support social change makers through her research and academic work. Through her teaching at Harvard and as the founder and faculty chair of the Social Innovation and Change Initiative, Professor Batilana has taught and worked closely with hundreds of change makers and leaders in social innovation across multiple sectors over the past years. Now, I could name a very, very long list of all her professional achievements. Believe me, we wouldn't have time for her presentation if I did. But I wanted to add that not only is she an extremely professional person, but she is an amazing person. She is kind, strong, and truly inspiring. I'm so grateful and honored, Julie, that you agreed to be here with us. And please join me in welcoming Julie.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's a real pleasure and an honor for me to have the opportunity to join you today. I wish I could be with you in person. I live in Boston. I'm in France at the moment. I arrived yesterday in France, and my sister is with us this weekend. So that's the reason why I couldn't be in person. I knew I would have to be there with her to enjoy time with her and to take care of her. So let me get started. I'm about to do something I never did before, which is to share more of our personal story as a family. And again, I'm delighted and honored to do that with you today. What I'd like to do to get started is share with you a tale of two sisters. They were born 2 years apart in the late 1970s in Marseille, in the south of France. I have to say that the elder couldn't wait to meet her baby sister, who arrived actually from the maternity with the most amazing gift, a beautiful pair of red clogs that the elder sister thought at the time had some kind of magical power, and that she's actually kept till that day. The two sisters grew up together. They were close to each other. They enjoyed time together, playing, laughing, waking up early during weekends, eating candy behind their parents' backs. And they continue to have a very loving sisterly relationship, supporting each other through ups and downs. Now, if we look back, though, over the past 44 years, I guess that a lot of people would say, though, that their childhood was not a typical childhood. And, you know, I guess they would say so because the youngest of the two sisters was born disabled. When she was born, doctors told her parents that she had an unidentified, mysterious kind of developmental disorder. And they were told that their daughter would not be able to walk, that she would not be able to speak. And so they would have to wait for 40 years to learn that their daughter actually had PURA syndrome. And even though she couldn't and still cannot speak, she was able to learn how to walk. And even though she's not speaking, she was also able to make a lot of friends across her different kinds of environments. And so, as you probably understand by now, the story I've been sharing is the story of our family and my sister, Emily, who you can see on those various pictures. Now, what I have to tell you is that Emily has always been one of the strongest, most courageous, and most inspiring people in my life. Now, that being said, growing up, I could tell that people were seeing Emily very differently from the way I was actually perceiving her. As a young girl, I remember being outraged when strangers were staring at her. And I know, you know, it must be your experience too. And I have to say it kind of happened all the time. Some of them were probably just afraid of her difference. Others just didn't know how to behave in her presence. And many of them came to us wanting to be nice and telling us how sorry they were that we had to deal with such a difficult situation as a family. Now, what most of these people had in common, and what they still have in common, is that they make the assumption that Emily, because of her diseases, actually has no power, that she's powerless. And this is a huge misconception, I would say, because what I'm going to argue today is that far from being powerless, Emily is actually one of the most powerful people I've met. she's been one of the most powerful people in our life as the family. But I'm also going to argue that it's not only in our family that she's been a very powerful person. She's actually been a very powerful person in the lives of many of the people she's encountered throughout her life over the past 44 years. Now, one may be thinking sort of, how is it that I can argue that Emily, who can barely control her own body, is one of the most powerful people I've met? If we want to address this question, then we have to pause for a minute and really think about the meaning of power, right? What is power? What does it mean to be powerful? Well, from a definitional standpoint, power is the ability of an individual or a group of individuals to influence other people's behavior. And Emily, let me tell you, has certainly been able to influence us as a family and many other people to do many different things, and a number of them wild things, I have to say. Emily happens to enjoy speed and adventure a lot. And so one of the things that she's convinced all of us to do is to accompany her on some kind of crazy roller coaster rides in different locations in France, and for some of them across the world. And you can see some of the pictures now. She's also been able to convince me to actually hop on a helicopter ride in the French Alps, even though I hate flying, especially in helicopter. Now, that being said, Emily's power, her power goes much beyond persuading us and many of her friends to get on roller coaster rides or to hop on helicopters. Let me spend a little bit more time on that. I would say that she has consistently inspired her family members and her friends to become better human beings. For example, she has shaped the kind of artist our mother Marika is today. You can see some of her paintings here. Our mother has learned to see the world through Emily's eyes. And her paintings are really meant to keep alive those who, like Emily, show courage and resilience in the face of adversity and hardship. She's also inspired my dad, who is a doctor by background, to actually make his experience and his expertise available for people with disability. And so as a result of that, my dad has had two professional careers happen at the exact same time. He was not only a doctor, but he also became the volunteering president of the not-for-profit organization La Bourgette, where my sister has been the resident for the past 35 years. Right? Emily has also influenced the trajectory of her brother-in-law, my husband, Romain, who has become a social entrepreneur and is committed to making sport more easily available to people with disability. She has also inspired our aunt, Caroline, to create Les Amis d'Emily, an organization that is also a not-for-profit and that provides handy sitter first services, the equivalent of babysitting services for kids and adults with disability. And through Les Amis d'Emily, Emily has made many new friends, and she's met her handy sitter, Marion, who you can see on these pictures. And also inspired by Emily, Marion very recently created her own social business that is all about transportation for people with disability. And you can see Emily very proudly sitting in the vehicle that Marion just acquired, and she's now using to drive disabled adults and kids throughout the area in Marseille, where my sister lives. Now, as for the younger generations, Emily has also influenced her niece Lou and her nephew Noé, who've both been actively engaged in different clubs that are all about bringing kids and teenagers together, those with special needs, those who do not have special needs, but they get all together to enjoy time and learn from each other. Now, as for me, Emily has influenced so many of my personal and my professional choices. She's been doing that since day one, when she came back home with those beautiful red clogs, and she continues to do that in a pretty extraordinary way. I knew as a young adult that I wanted to be able to help the amazing social change makers who work tirelessly to help people like Emily find a place in our society. And so this led me to become a scholar specializing in the study of social change and its politics. And that actually led me to creating the Social Innovation and Change Initiative at Harvard University that Caroline mentioned in her introductory comments. Now, as a result of that work, over the past 20 years, I've actually had the great privilege of working with social change makers, including some working in the field of disability and disability rights, and I've worked with them across the world. And now here is what I've seen. I've seen that people have great ideas and that some of them are able to implement them. And then the question becomes, how can we implement these changes at scale to help more people, to really make the changes happen? Now, to make those changes happen, you need to go against deeply rooted systems. And what I've seen is that even though people have great ideas, they too often fail when it comes to implementing the changes at scale. Why? Because they do not understand power. And so what I'd like to do now is spend some time talking more about power, what it is, where it comes from. And my hope is that what I'm going to share will be helpful to you as we think about the important projects you're working on with your loved ones, in your community, more broadly as part of the foundation and the broader movement for disability rights. I hope it will be helpful to you so that we can together become more effective social change makers and create the kind of environment that's going to be a better environment for patients with PURA. So we talked about power, and I gave the definition of power, right? What is power? Power is the ability of an individual or a group of individuals to influence other people's behavior. Now, the truth is that this is a definition, but not an explanation. The next question becomes, fine, but then where does power come from? I've asked this question to thousands and thousands of people over the past 20 years, including a lot of social change makers working in the field of disability. And I've come to worry a lot about the answers I've been getting to this question. Why? Because I've come to realize that people tend to have deep misconceptions in mind about power and how it works. What I want to do now is share with you the three main misconceptions that I have identified. Now, as I do that, I want to be clear that my hope is that I'm going to be able to not only help you debunk these misconceptions, but that I'm also going to share some tools with you that will enable you to help others debunk these misconceptions. It could be that some of you don't have these misconceptions in mind anymore, or you never had them. But I can tell you from the research I've done and the work I've done with social change makers that you're working with people who are still dealing with these misconceptions. And I want to give you tools to help them debunk them. Right. So the first misconception about power that I've encountered and that I see all the time is this idea that somehow power would be a possession, right? So if we could spend a day together, then you would see that people very often come to me with the same question. Here is what they say. Julie, can you please give me the list? I was puzzled the first few times because I was like, the list of what? And then I got to understand that what people want from me is the list of personal characteristics that would supposedly make anyone powerful in any situation. People want to know, do I have those characteristics? Can I emulate them? I need to know, right? The second misconception about power is this idea that power is only for the people at the very top, that it is for the CEOs, the top executives, the general, the presidents, and so on. And only for them. Right? And the third misconception that's probably the most widespread is this idea that power is dirty. So now if you put all three together, you hear what I hear all the time, including from a lot of social change makers. They would say, you know what, I don't think I have all the personal characteristics. And I'm not one of the people at the very top, but good for me, because at least I'm not getting my hands dirty. Now, I've come to worry a lot about these misconceptions because they have huge implications for all of us individually and collectively. Individually, these misconceptions are frustrating. Why? Because what we have in common is that we want to have an impact in our communities, in our organizations. But if we do not understand power, then we cannot have the kind of impact that we aspire to. That's when we become frustrated. And when people get frustrated, guess what they do? They turn their back away from power and they leave it to others to decide for them. And this is when we get in trouble collectively, because if we collectively do not understand power, then how can we possibly get organized to identify, to prevent, or to stop power abuses when they emerge and when they threaten our freedoms and well-being? It is the 16th year in a row that democracy has been declining across the globe, right? So this is why I'm saying, these misconceptions have deep implications and they are worrisome. But I'm also going to argue that there is good news. Why do I say so? I say so because what I've seen from my research, teaching, and advising is that when people understand power dynamics, then they can become more effective leaders and more effective change makers. And what I've also seen is that power dynamics can absolutely be learned. And this is actually the reason why I ended up dedicating 3 years of my life to writing this book, Power for All, with my dear friend and colleague Tiziana Cacharo. What we wanted to do with the book is democratize access to knowledge about power to enable people to have the kind of impact that they aspire to. Right? That was a critical thing for us. And we wrote that book for all, including those who've been excluded from power for a very long time. So this is leading me back to the key question: where does power come from? And I'm going to make a big statement now. I'm going to argue that I'll be actually ready to sign a document saying that the fundamentals of power, the great laws of power, were the same thousands of years ago when human beings were getting organized to live together on this planet. And I'm willing to sign a document now saying that they will remain the same for as long as there will be human beings on this planet, assuming we get our act together and we save our planet. So what are the fundamentals? Here we go. Power resides in control over access to valued resources. This is simple, yet critically important. So bear with me. What does it mean? It means that I have power over you if I control access to resources that you need and want, right? And you have power over me if you control access to resources that I need and want. Simple example, it could be that you're controlling access to a budget that I desperately need to be able to implement this important project for PURA patients, right? If you control that budget, then you certainly have power over me. Now, it could also be that in the meantime, I happen to be connected to one of the world experts in the field of research on PURA, right, on the PURA syndrome. And if I happen to be the only person you know connected to that person, or one of very few people you know connected to that person, and you absolutely need to talk to that person to complete the project you're working on, then I also have some power over you. So when we understand the fundamentals of power, what do we understand? We understand that power is inherently relational and that it can change, it can fluctuate over time. And I want to illustrate that with an example. I'd like you to meet Nezuma and Jube. In the process of writing this book, Power for All, Tiziana and I relied on our research. We also relied on research over all the fields of social sciences. And we also interviewed more than 100 people across the world with very, very different paths to and through power. And Nezuma is one of them. I vividly remember the first time I met and interviewed Nezuma. Nezuma lives in Tanzania in a remote rural community. And when I interviewed her, I asked her about her life, and she told me that growing up in her community, her dream was to become a teacher or a doctor. Then she said she never had the opportunity to go to school. And then I asked her about her power. And at that point, she paused and she remained silent. And then here's what she said. She said, Julie, for the longest time in my life, I actually felt quite powerless. And then she paused again. And then she looked at me and she said, I think it's not only that I felt powerless, I think I was quite objectively quite powerless because the decisions in the village are made by the powerful members of the village council. And I cannot remember a situation in which a woman was a member of that council. Now, in 2016, though, Nezuma's life radically changed. She went from feeling and quite objectively being quite powerless, as she said, to becoming one of the most powerful members of her community. Right. Now, in fact, so powerful that months later, she was asked to join the village council and became the first woman to represent other women on the council. Now, how could that possibly happen? It happened because in 2016, she crossed the path of an international NGO called Barefoot College. Barefoot College has developed a truly innovative program that enables women across the global south to become solar engineers through learning by doing and peer-to-peer learning, even when they are illiterate. So the representatives of Barefoot College came to Nezuma's community. They said they were looking for a volunteer who would relocate to the city for 5 months, study for 5 months. And they said if the person graduates and becomes a solar engineer, the person would be given all the necessary materials to come and electrify the community. The members of the powerful village council knew how much people in the community needed access to reliable electricity, which they didn't have at the time. So they encouraged people to volunteer. That's when men raised their hand. That's when the representatives of Berkshire College said, we're very sorry, it's going to have to be a woman. That's when Nezuma raised her hand. Initially, her husband didn't want to let her go. So the members of Barefoot College worked together with the members of the village council to convince him to let her go. Nezuma went to the city. She studied for 5 months. She graduated. She came back. She electrified the village. Her husband, by the way, was very proud to be holding the ladder, as his wife was now the engineer-in-chief. So here's the thing, right? When Nezuma brought power to the village in a literal way, she also became one of the most powerful members of the community. Why? Because she controlled access to a resource everyone needed and wanted, namely electricity. Now, we human beings certainly value access to money, budgets, we value tangible properties, we value resources such as electricity, but we also value other psychological resources, right? Such as achievement, status, autonomy, affiliation, morality. And those are important sources of power. Like think about Emily and the amazing adults and kids in your life, right, who have PURA syndrome. Emily, for joyful approach to life and her resilience in the face of adversity, is setting an example for her family and her friends. And in doing so, she has inspired all of us to take action in the various ways that I described earlier, right? So now, where are we? We can officially debunk the fallacies about power, right? No, power is not a possession. I would say power is actually always relative. Think about Nezuma. Nezuma had no power, as she explained to me, right? Or felt quite powerless. And then she became a solar engineer. And in the context of her community, it gave her a lot of power. But if Nezuma had become a solar engineer in a larger city where everyone already had access to electricity, then we could have said, congratulations, Nezuma, but that wouldn't have given her as much power as what it did in the context of her community. So power is always relative. Now, Nezuma also provides an example when it comes to the fact that no, power is not only for the people at the top, it is potentially for all. When Nezuma came back, she was not yet a member of the village council. She didn't have that authority, right? And yet she was very powerful. Now you're getting the French accent, so I have to take you to France at least once in the time we have together. So I'm going to take you to France to illustrate further that critical point. I want to tell you about a study conducted in France in the 1950s, 1960s, in an organization called La CETA. It's an organization that produced cigarettes at the time, and that French researchers decided to study to better understand the productivity of workers on the floor of factories. And this is the floor of the factory that they were studying. So they contacted La CETA to see if they could come and conduct field work and observations and interviews. La CETA accepted. And so on the first day of the observations and the beginning of the research program, the researchers met with the leadership of the organization. They asked for the organizational chart and some other archival materials. And then they went to the floor of the factory and they observed what was happening. Now, after 2 days, they asked to meet with the leadership of the company again. And so here is what they said. They went to the top management and they said, there's an issue. The issue is that you actually gave us the wrong organizational chart. At that point, as you can imagine, the leadership was quite annoyed. They said they had only one organizational chart and they gave it to the researchers. And then the researchers explained, they said, according to your organizational charts, those workers, they are reporting to foremen who are reporting to middle managers who are reporting to top managers. The leadership said, yeah, this is indeed the case. But then the researchers went on and said that makes no sense, because anytime a top manager, a middle manager, or even a foreman comes on the floor of the factory and asks the workers to do something, the workers seem not to care. Yet, when a maintenance worker in charge of repairing machines comes to the floor of the factory and asks the workers to do something, the workers are not excited, but they immediately comply. The issue, though, is that those maintenance workers were as low in the hierarchy, if not lower, than the workers themselves. So in this organization, the most powerful people on the floor of the factory seem to be the people who were the lowest in the organizational hierarchy. The researchers couldn't understand at first, so they went back and they observed again. And here is what they understood. They understood that machines on the floor of the factory had a bad tendency to break, right? And they also understood that the maintenance workers who were deeply aware of that were the only ones who knew how to repair machines. Their approach was not very ethical, you could say. They decided to keep this information for themselves, to not write it down anywhere, to not share it with anyone, because they knew that they controlled access to the most valued resource in this organization, a machine that worked, because the workers were paid depending on the number of units they produced each day, right? So what I want to highlight here is that power and authority are not the same, right? Martin Luther here is at the top of the hierarchy and has authority, right? That is actually the formal right to give orders and commands. Now, that may be a source of power, or that may not be. Authority, as we saw with the example of the CETA, is no guarantee of power. And in fact, my dear friend and co-author Tiziana Cacharo and I try to address this question: who are the most effective change makers? And what is it that we found through our quantitative and qualitative studies? We found that the change makers who are central in the network of their organization or in the network of the field of society they're trying to change, these people are much more effective change makers. What does it mean to be central in a network? You're central in a network if you are one of the people to whom others go to for advice. Right? These people to whom others go to for advice are more effective change makers. Why? Because they are the people others trust, and trust is a huge conduit of influence. So now we have officially debunked the second fallacy. No, power is not only for the people at the top, it's potentially for all, right? And our network of relationships plays a critical role in enabling us to build the power we need to make change happen, even when we do not have the authority. Now, we still need to debunk the last fallacy, this idea that power is dirty. But power itself, as we all know, is not dirty. Power is the energy we need to get things done. The dirtiness, if anywhere, is not in power, it's in us. And so what we have to do is cultivate humility, cultivate empathy, and there's so much we're learning. At least I've been learning every day through my sister and the experience of living with her when it comes to cultivating humility and empathy. But if we cultivate humility and empathy and we welcome and enhance checks on our power within our organizations, our foundations, our companies, and so on, then we can engage with power cleanly and use it as the energy we collectively need to make change happen, right? So now where are we? We can understand power and how it works. We also know that to map any kind of political landscape, to understand who has power and who doesn't, there are only two questions we need to ask. What do people value? And who controls access to the valued resources, right? So if we think about the whole field of research, and the whole field of like people and organizations caring for patients with PURA, as we think about mapping that political landscape, now there's a tool. We can put on some kind of infrared glasses and understand what do people value, who controls access to the valued resources. And then importantly, we can also assess our own sources of power better by better understanding the channels through which we can control access over valued resources. Now, there's one last thing I want to highlight. You're probably thinking that a question remains, and you're right? I've been saying that power is not a possession, it's not only for the people at the top, but then if this is so, why does it steadily accrue to some groups, right, of people while continually eluding others? Well, this is because, as we all know, power tends to be sticky, right? Relationships do not happen in a vacuum. Societies and organizations are shaped by deeply entrenched power hierarchies. By a power hierarchy here, I mean an accepted order of who commands more versus less power in a given society or in a given organization. And through the stories we tell, through the laws we develop, once power is distributed a certain way over time, the resulting hierarchy acquires some kind of a patina of legitimacy. Now, this is very true. And it's hard to change existing structures of power. But we know from history that we can. And so what it means is that sticky is not the same as stuck. And this is what I want to end with before we open it for a conversation. What I want to do there now is highlight the power of collective action that I know you're deeply aware of, especially as you're sitting all together in that room and as we're joining online for that conversation and the whole conference. Each of us individually, we may not have access to all the resources that we need to make the kind of changes that we want to see happen, right? Especially for all the PURA patients that we so deeply care about. The thing, though, is that if we join forces with others the way you are now, then we can significantly expand the pool of resources that we have access to. Right? Now, this is the power of collective action in organizations and in society. Now, leveraging the power of this collective action, I would say that, yes, we can create a society that's going to be greener, that's going to be more democratic, that's going to be more just, and that's going to be more inclusive, of people with disability. Now, I don't want to give this impression here that I'm naive. The reality is that there continue to be massive power imbalances, right? What history, though, shows is that what we human beings created, we together can change. But there's one thing I want to highlight, and it's the following. Agitating, which is certainly very important to make change happen, but agitating against the status quo is not enough to make change happen. We also need to innovate, and we also need to orchestrate. Right? Agitation without innovation is a set of complaints without a way forward. And innovation without orchestration is a set of potentially great ideas, but without impact. So we collectively need to agitate, innovate, and orchestrate. Agitators are the ones who speak out against the status quo and raise public awareness of the problems. The innovators are the ones who develop actionable solutions to address the grievances identified by the agitators. And finally, the orchestrators enable the coordinations of all the parties involved to put in place the changes that allow the solution and vision by the innovators to be adopted at scale. So we all have a role to play as agitators, innovators, orchestrators. Some of us are equipped to play all of these roles at once. For some of us, it's really hard to do so. I would say especially very effective agitators often have a hard time becoming very effective orchestrators, because the time of orchestration is a time when you want to bring everyone with you, including those who were your opponents earlier on. But again, we don't have to play all those roles. We just need to be self-aware and surround ourselves with people who play these different roles so that we can together continue to more effectively work to make important changes happen, right? So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I'm looking forward to a conversation. I mentioned the book. What I want to tell you is there is also a website. In case you want to go on the website, you'll see that we created a quiz that you can take to have more information about your own relationship to power. And some of you may be interested in such quizzes, and they may find it helpful to have a chance to think more about your relationship to power. And then I want to mention a course I created with Harvard Business Online, Power and Influence for Positive Impact. I'm very proud of this course. And the reason why I'm so proud of the course is because I actually had to fight internally to make a change happen. But it was really important to me to make the course available to social change makers. And so people who take that course usually pay, I think, something like $1,700. But through the work you're doing as a social change maker, or through the work that some of your friends, family members, acquaintances are doing as social change makers, they come to realize that this content on power would be helpful to you. Then through the Social Innovation and Change Initiative at HKS, at the Harvard Kennedy School that I created, you can apply for a scholarship. And instead of paying the full amount, then you just pay $50 or nothing. And you can have access to all of that content. Again, that's content meant to help change the power structures and enable those who don't have access to that content to have access to it. So don't hesitate to publicize that and share with others if it can be helpful to them. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for me to join you. Enough from me. I spoke a lot, so I'm just going to now stop sharing so that we can have more of an exchange in the remaining time. If you want to, I know it's also been a long day, so you may also just want to use that time to refresh and have a little bit of a breather. So we should do whatever is best for you all at the moment, but thank you so much for your attention.
Do we have any questions here?
Okay, I have a question. Do you have any advice for us in our daily lives as we need, and when we're in those moments that we need to stand up for ourselves or for our children, to sort of ground ourselves or remind us of our power, like in the moment?
Yeah, this is a very important question you're asking. Thank you. You know, it's interesting because there's a lot of research on racial and gender stereotypes and how to ground yourself in those situations. As you know, there's not enough research on disability. So what I'm going to do now is a parallel, and I'm going to share with you what we learned from that research on stereotypes, because when it comes to us standing up and you know, like sort of asking for what we need to ask for our loved ones, it's the same kind of situation where, you know, like the stereotype of here you are, you're a caregiver and the person is disabled, and yet again you're asking for something, and that may lead us to indeed not step up in the way we would want to, as effectively as we would want. So what we've learned from research on that dimension is that one thing we can individually do quite effectively is remind ourselves of our values, right? Why is it that we're doing what we're doing, and why is it that we're doing it for our loved ones, but not only, as part of that broader movement when it comes to disability rights, when it comes to standing up collectively. And when people take time in those situations or just before to remind themselves of their values, then they are less constrained and they're better able to stand up for themselves. Now, as I say that, I also want to be very mindful of the fact that the truth is that those are individual interventions, and I think that knowing about them can be very helpful, but obviously we need to continue working collectively to change the organizations, to change the community, to change our societal system, so that we don't need to do that in such a way, so that we create the kind of inclusive environment in which we're supported on that journey. So that's my way of saying that this shouldn't be on you, this shouldn't be just on us. Like, we have those personal interventions, but then we have to continue working collectively to change the system.
All right, I think we're good. Thank you, Julie, so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. And my sister is with us now and this weekend, so that's the reason why we cannot join, but I'm going to be watching everything online as soon as it's posted. So from my family and so many others, we will be watching. Thank you so much. This is so important and so helpful. Take very good care.
Thank you.